It is a material with which a lot of money is made, too valuable just for coins. It is durable, it does not rust, and it conducts well. The red gold has been indispensable to mankind for millennia. Copper. The largest copper mine in the world is situated in the north of Chile in the Atacama Desert, a hostile place where rain only falls every few years. In Chuquicamata, people have been turning ore into copper for more than 100 years. Nowhere else are there as many reserves as there are here. A quarter of worldwide demand comes from the mine of Chuquicamata. Every morning, Vladimiro Zabidra has to go high up to get to his place of work. His lorry is roughly the size of a family home and can carry up to 360 tons of ore. Vladimiro has been working at the state-owned mine association Codelco for 17 years. His father too mined ore here. I have always liked driving the biggest lorry in the world. It is as if a childhood dream has come true. I always wanted to work for this factory. My lorry is really very big. It is 840 tons that we drive with here. The smaller vehicles have to have a flag on their roof so that they are not run down by the giant lorries by accident. For safety reasons, traffic is on the left in the mine. Experience showed that drivers have a better overview that way. This morning, Vladimiro transports worthless rock. It contains too little copper and is therefore taken to a slag heap. The drivers have to maneuver their lorries close to the abyss in order to dispose of the overburden. There is always a fear of slipping off. Of course, one has to be very, very careful. Pay attention. These lorries are very, very dangerous because of their weight and volume, if nothing else. In winter, the lorries are iced over and so are the paths in the pit, and there is a risk that these large lorries start to slip because of their weight alone. You have to learn to control them in order to get home in one piece. The foundry is the final stop in the processing of copper. Here, the prepared ore is smelted several times. Every smelting process increases the concentration of the metal. At the end, what remains is almost pure copper, 99.98%. Juan Chinchilla is there for the casting. Juan is responsible for 2 furnaces and 20 workers. They regularly take samples to check the copper content. Here it is 70% right now. The foundry is a labyrinth of halls and staircases. During the smelting procedure, the furnaces suck in oxygen, a whistling sound. The noise they make is deafening and they are red hot. Juan Chinchilla is glad when he has some work to do in his quiet air-conditioned control room every so often. All furnaces are monitored by computer and cameras. The workers receive their instructions by radio. Although safety regulations are very strict, Juan has experienced some bad accidents. It was during the night shift, just when a colleague was about to repair part of a current transformer. Something went wrong. The machine caught fire. It happened near the control box. The worker was not able to get out. He had no chance and he simply burned to death. We saw it through the screen. We saw how he desperately tried to get out, threw himself on the floor, but he didn't manage to get out. We saw it and couldn't do anything because there was no access to that area. The game with fire is difficult to control. In the last years, the state-owned mining corporation Codelco has done a lot to change their workers' awareness. The macho minero, who believed that only weaklings wear gas masks and safety shoes, no longer exists. Protective clothing is compulsory today. If you are caught without it more than 3 times, you are cautioned. If you do not keep to the regulations after that, you get fired. In Chuquicamata, the ore has a relatively high copper content at 1.5%. It thus contains almost twice as much as the mines of the competition in other countries. That makes mining enormously lucrative here, despite the difficult conditions. The ore is mined in the world's largest artificial hole. It is 4 kilometers long, 2 kilometers wide, and 1 kilometer deep. Every day, somewhere there is a blast in the mine. That way, the copper-rich rock is loosened and can be loaded. Transportation with a lorry from the mine takes 40 minutes. Around 100 lorries work during each shift. Vladimiro's final trip before he finishes work. The drivers have a lot of power and a strong trade union. It has managed to achieve that at 2,000 euros per month, they earn the best money in the mine. This often causes the other colleagues to be envious. Vladimiro delivers his final load to the so-called concentration, where the ore is first of all mechanically processed. Concentration, as the name suggests. Here, concentrated copper is produced, but the journey there is long, across endless conveyor belts and through numerous mills. At first, the ore is roughly crushed, sorted, and washed. Every day, this plant processes 180,000 tons of rock, which eventually yield 2,500 tons of pure copper. Only few people still work here. Everything is monitored by computer. Only the grinding gears of the mills, which are made from simple iron balls and iron bars, have to be exchanged and maintained from time to time. Here, the ore is ground relatively finely into a grey mud. Every 2 or 3 weeks, the mills are completely taken apart and newly fitted. This procedure takes an entire day. This is where the brain of the concentration is. Everything is interlinked. and the men in the control room can check at any time whether there's enough rock on the conveyor belts or whether there's a shortage of water somewhere. They are told this in the voice of Tanya, a former trainee, which is played back by computer. Previously it was a man's voice, but no one had listened to it. It is a woman's voice, and that makes our soul happy. A woman at our place of work, where there are only men, that relaxes us. Tanya is the soul of everything. That is the truth. And you can't live without a soul. It is like a garden without flowers, like an abandoned garden. Do you understand? The chemical processing is done in the same building. In these large tanks, tensides are added to the boulders. Then the mixture is stirred well until it is nice and foamy. That way the copper rises and the boulders separate. The copper content is now already at up to 35%, concentrated enough for the smeltery. Chuquicamata. That is the mine, but also a town specifically for the workers. Until recently, almost everyone lived right next to the mine. For more than 100 years, this has been a town exclusively for mineros. When Vladimiro leaves work for home, he does not have far to go. But this proximity also has disadvantages. The waste gases from the smeltery and the dust pollute the air. A few years ago, Chile signed contracts to comply with international environmental norms. Since then, it has become clear that the inhabitants of Chuquicamata will have to be relocated by 2007. Of the original 12,000 people, only 8,000 still live here. And Vladimiro's family, too, is already sitting on packed suitcases. Vladimiro and his wife Susanna have taken their grandchildren to live with them. Their own children have left town to go to university. Vladimiro and Susanna are very reluctant to move. They have spent their entire lives in Chuqui, the pet name for their town. Susanna is preparing her grandchildren for the move. And you will go to school directly on the bus? Yes. Well, that will be a nice responsibility for you. You know, you have to get on and off exactly in the right place. If the bus doesn't let you out in the right place in Calama, then look for Chuqui. They will miss the calm, their friends, the familiar, says Vladi. Codelco contaminates us while we sleep. When you sleep, you don't really notice the pollution. During the day, there is more wind, and so the smoke disperses. When I drive my lorry at night and look for our houses, the mountains, which are very close by, I don't see them. That's how much dust there is. The danger comes with age. The majority of the workers who retire move to the harbor, to the south, but they don't have much life left. A pensioner from Codelco usually dies after 3 to 4 years. Because when they go with silicosis. They leave contaminated. The end of an era for Vladimiro's family, for the town of Chuquicamata. The state-owned mining group Codelco is promoting health and safety for their workers, but they care like that not purely out of brotherly love. There are tangible financial reasons. The group needs new areas. Once the workers have gone, their houses will get buried under boulders and overburden. The hunger for copper is insatiable. Dust is man's biggest enemy here. In order to fight it, one needs water, but water is scarce in one of the driest deserts on Earth. This torrential stream is coming from the chemical processing of the copper mud. Highly poisonous, filthy water that gets diverted into the desert for reprocessing. It's an economy measure. The more Codelco reprocesses its wastewater, the less money they need to spend on fresh water from the mountains. David Montesinos is responsible for there always being plenty of water in the mine. Otherwise, production comes to a standstill. It is part of his daily routine to monitor the pumping and distribution stations. A new cover is being built for the canal because the pressure is sometimes so high that the corrosive flood frothers over. The water is very contaminated when it leaves the mine. For example, with arsenic, acids, and lots of chemicals. It can't be used for anything. You can't drink it, and the acids can damage your skin. It is essential for us not to be wasteful with the water, to know how to be economical with it. The better we do that, the better it is not just for us, but also for our children. Every day, David covers 60 to 70 kilometers on his control drives. He makes sure that the leads are tight and he talks to the workers. David loves his job in the desert. Everybody thinks here life stops, here green nature stops. But the desert has its own magic too. It gives you something that inspires you. Being alone here is a very spiritual experience for me. Reprocessing is simple. The water pours across the decline into the desert, sits in the basin for a few days so that the harmful chemical can sink to the bottom. Then it is pumped back into the mine. You cannot drink it, but it is sufficient for the mine. It used to be different. Worse, much worse. In the 1930s, the Americans ran the Chilean mines. They did not care about the environment. This road leads from a mine further north down to the coast, across 100 kilometers. The wastewater went the same way. More than 50 years, the dirty copper-rich water poured through the canals, untreated, corrosive, reeking. It was the cheapest solution. It was not necessary to reprocess the water because there was more fresh water coming down from the Andes to this plant. The water finished up in the sea, and although the discharge was stopped at the beginning of the 90s, the coast is still contaminated. The sea had stored the harmful chemicals, and now it gradually sets them free again. There is hardly any life left over a stretch of 7 kilometers. Chilean biologists have been investigating the effects of the catastrophe for a few years. A checkpoint 20 kilometers north of the contaminated area. Here, there is still plenty of algae. The biologists from Universidad Católica in Santiago de Chile take out spores in algae in order to plant them in the contaminated places. Professor Juan Moreno believes that it will be decades before the coast recovers. With this type, or organism, the copper directly affects the cells. The cells are destroyed when the amount of copper exceeds a certain level. The plants are unable to regenerate, so that in the end they die. The algae are replanted in the contaminated areas of the coast. They are fixed to the rocks using drills. Some algae have already survived an entire year. Scientists are investigating whether they also reproduce. This is the second experiment. The first one took place 1 year ago. Compared to those at the control places, where they grow naturally, you can see that they don't look good after 2 months. They don't grow. They pull in their arms. They don't stick to the rock. A few kilometers further on, the little port of Chanaral. Until the early 80s, the wastewater from the mine ran right across the beach into the sea. There are still traces of it today. The beach outside the little town is green from the oxidized copper. A gigantic reservoir for copper mud and other highly poisonous substances such as arsenic. It would cost the state-owned mining company millions to clean it up. Instead, they built a playground and a beach promenade to calm down the angry residents. The strong coastal wind blows the fine dust from the effluent sludge into the town. The environmental officer and the chief press officer of Codelco. They are trying to qualify the danger.
No son tóxicos.
The copper remains are not poisonous to the people. The real danger is the dust that spreads through the air. The tiny particles that it contains hugely impair the quality of the air. It is true that the fine dust damages people's lungs. Only after Pinochet was overthrown at the end of the 80s did the residents dare protest against this environmental catastrophe. Last summer, the Chilean president swam here to show that the water is not poisonous. We essentially have two options. On the one hand, we can try and cover up the sand so that the dust doesn't swirl up. The other option is wide-ranging, artificial plantings that could provide protection. The mining company has created another job. This man combats the dust with a water hose.
Entonces ahí hay un problema de costos involucrados.
It is ultimately always about who will pay. No, I don't believe that Codelco does enough to remedy the damages, given the extent of the damages. Codelco certainly doesn't do enough. In a few years, only the graveyard will be evidence that people once lived in Chuquicamata. Vladimiro, like many miners, is very Christian. He often takes his son to visit Virgin Mary statues and graveyards. Chuquicamata will disappear, but it is a good thing that the graveyard will stay. A lot is linked to it: emotions, family, friends. It is important that nobody should be forced to unbury his friend and bury him again somewhere else. That would happen if the mine came here too. That would be terrible. Vladimiro's son has already left the town towards the sea to study. He cannot imagine going back to Chuquicamata, nor can he imagine the hard work in the mine. Because my father's work is very exhausting, especially the night shifts. It is difficult to recover from it. No, I don't want to drive his lorry. I want to study in order to be able to do a job that I enjoy. In the early evening, the lorries leave the mine. Now is the time for the daily blastings. For security reasons, everybody has to leave the valley. When in 2015 the open cast reserves are exhausted, they will continue mining underground.
¿Estamos listos en el punto de ignición? Pero ¿cuánto para usted, secundario, al sur de la bala 096?
The mine never sleeps. 24 hours a day, the lorries carry the ore away from the pit. Day and night, the rock is milled and copper is smelted. "400 kilometers south of the Atacama Desert, there is another Codelco mine. Here, the copper is mined underground. When the men drive in, they stay in the mountain for 8 hours. They call the transport vehicle cage because they sit so close together. They go down 3 kilometers and are not returned until the evening. The El Inca mountain is at the edge of the little town El Salvador. Those who are late have to take the goods train. Mine worker Jaime is hurrying. Everybody calls Jaime Chuck Norris because he used to enter every fist fight. A true old-styled minero. There are plenty of trains that he can take. 3 crews drive the ore from the mountain all day long. Hello, Chuck Norris. How are you? Take that. Late as always again. I'm just in time, my friend. El Salvador is in the mountains at an altitude of almost 2,500 meters. Copper has been mined here for only 50 years. The American corporate group had to move the mine to this place because the reserves were exhausted elsewhere. That is where the name El Salvador comes from, salvation for 3,000 mine workers and their families. Underground. Darkness, dust, confinement are the natural enemies of engine driver Hector.
Es duro la pega.
Working in the mine is hard and difficult.
Muy esclavizado.
You are enslaved.
Mucha tierra.
We have to work a lot of earth,
Se paga
many
mal
stones,
pagado.
and we are badly paid.
Pero de todas maneras,
Whether I like the work or not is not an issue. You have to do it for your family.
igual no.
You get used to it.
Aunque uno con el tiempo se va acostumbrando,
You get
aunque se
silicosis
está
or you
jodiendo
don't,
la salud más
but
que
I
todo,
still
se
show
silicosis,
up every day.
silicosis acá. Pero hay que estar aquí igual, todos los días. Muchas gracias. Gracias, que bien, más.
While Chuck is on his way to work, Hector drives on to load up fresh ore. It is particularly dusty near the chute. The rock masses drop from the top floors down into the depth. The entire mountain is divided up into individual floors like a multi-story car park. The trains pick up their cargo at the lowest level and drive it to the stone mills and the so-called concentration. Chuck has done everything in the mine before. At the moment he works on stabilizing the tunnels. He collects a welding device for this task from the material distribution place. In over 30 years, Chuck has worked in many different mines in Chile. Basically, we earn a little money here for shortening our lives. With all this dust here in the environment, you ruin your health in the long run.
Del ambiente que lo estamos desarrollando acá como trabajadores.
The mountain is full of holes like Swiss cheese. 5 levels with more than 1,000 kilometers of roads and 100 kilometers of rails. Sometimes even Chuck is surprised that the whole thing stands up. Chuck is welding the sheet pile walls for a new railway tunnel. If this is not done properly, the result can be deadly. In one of the shafts, the blasting was calculated wrong, and so there was a fire, and the ceiling collapsed. One has to be very careful when stabilizing the levels and the vaults, so that the ceilings definitely won't fall down. This digger is called Scoop. It transports rock to the chutes. Nobody must be where the scoop works. The digger races through the narrow tunnels in darkness and at high speed. The load of the scoop is intended for the lower levels of the mine. The little water fountain that is there to combat the all-pervading dust in the mine is almost touching. One floor down, the work goes on. The hammer begins to crush the lumps that are just a little too big. Once the hammer has finished its job, the stones move to the lowest level, where they are loaded onto trains and transported out of the mountain. As long as the freshly crushed lumps are not completely dusted over, the copper shines. The miners also spend their lunch break underground. The way to the top is far too long. There would be no time for a break. They bring their food from home and warm it up in the water quench. The canteen is just about big enough for a dozen workers. But Chuck Norris and his mates love spending time together. The jokes and teases make them forget their hard work in the mountain, at least for a little while. Really, they are all my friends, but especially those who are useful right now. They are my best friends. Some may not like me, but I don't care about that. Everybody here has nicknames. Here we have Ink. He is also a journalist. El Florentino. He regularly changes his name. That helps him so that he doesn't have that many children.
Acá está el cajoncito. Cajoncito de tele, dicen él. Muy buen niño.
Him over there, he is called Little Box. He's a good guy. He has a lot of money in his little box. There are blastings underground too. Wherever the troop works, the area is prohibited. There are 4 people on each vehicle. 2 close off the area and the others prepare the explosive charges. Underground explosions are dangerous and have to be calculated precisely, or the stability of the mountain of holes is at risk. Carefully, the men prepare the charges. The miners are most scared of electrical sparks that are able to trigger explosions prematurely. The drill prepares the holes for the blastings. It is always several per rock. The blasting material is shock resistant and it is ignited electrically. We of course have to see if it can get dangerous. For example, if the stones are porous on top, they can fall off at any time. We check that beforehand so that nothing happens. Fire, fire, the men from the blasting troop shout. Nobody must be left in the passageways. All work stops. Every day, a dozen of such blastings take place in the mountainous labyrinth. The tunnels are driven deeper and deeper, and the passageways are connected with each other. End of shift. Waiting for the train. Time to tell the story of the day. And time to sing songs about love, suffering, and desire in the wild life of the miners. Although they are not black like coal miners, they are happy to wash off the fine layer of mine dust. Back in Chuquicamata. This morning, Vladimiro is off work to finish the work on his new house. He and his family are moving to the town of Calama, 20 kilometers away. This will be their new home. Calama is booming and has grown to 150,000 inhabitants in the last few years. That is a lot for a desert town. The mining company Codelco is building a new district in the desert for its workers. Houses like out of a construction set. This is the street in which Vladimiro and his family will live in the future. The house is not like the one they had in Chuquicamata. Fitted carpets, smooth walls, everything new and modern. The rooms are smaller, but there are more of them. The mining company financed the building work. The workers are getting a low-interest credit. In total, the 3-bedroom house only costs $25,000. Vladimiro is able to pay off the debts slowly out of his wages. Well, I am sorry to leave Chuqui. It has been so many years. My grandchildren were born there. Well, I have spent a lot of my life there.
Ya hemos hecho una vida ya.
Well, I am happy. Because unlike in the house in Chucky, I do all these things in my own house. Nobody can send me into the street. Nobody can say that used to be your house and can say to me that it is rented out tomorrow. Or say, you have to go elsewhere. Your contract has run out, you have to go. I have now got a house that belongs to me. The initial skepticism has died down. Vladimiro's family has got to like their new home, even though Susanna is sure that she will not be able to sleep properly here during the first few weeks. Copper, the red gold. In the end, it leaves the mines of the Atacama Desert pressed to a sheet. Several thousand tons tied up into handy packages. They polish the almost pure copper one last time so that the expensive precious metal on its way to China or Europe does not oxidize and turn green. It is only 100 kilometers to the sea, but the train takes 6 hours. The steep mountain drives forced engineers in the 1920s to accomplish great feats. Bend after bend, it winds its way towards the Pacific.